President Sisi marks July 23rd revolution anniversary with praise for resilience and progress. Israeli sources say Gaza ceasefire talks in the final stage amid hopes of imminent deal. And Russia and Ukraine resumed direct peace talks in Istanbul after a 7-week pause. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has addressed the nation on the 73rd anniversary of the July 23rd revolution, praising national progress and resilience. In his televised address, President Sisi hailed the achievements of the Egyptian people since the 1952 revolution, emphasizing efforts since 2014 to build a modern and inclusive state. He cited key successes in counter-terrorism, infrastructure and urban development, and highlighted the Decent Life Initiative for improving rural living standards. Sisi reaffirmed Egypt's role as a pillar of stability in a region facing ongoing turmoil. Israeli sources said Gaza ceasefire talks are in their final stage, with Hamas expected to reply to the latest proposal within hours. Israeli media report that most disputes in the Gaza ceasefire negotiations have been resolved, with a final response from Hamas expected tonight or tomorrow. Officials say the remaining points relate to withdrawal lines and detainee releases, with gaps narrowing significantly. The U.S. has warned Hamas that certain guarantees may be withdrawn if a timely response is not received. Egypt's Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli has reiterated Egypt's firm support for Palestine, calling for a Gaza ceasefire and a political path to peace. He called for practical steps towards implementing the two-state solution and backed a clear political path to achieve lasting peace in the Middle East. Madbouli also firmly rejected any displacement of Palestinians, denouncing it as a violation of international law. At least 100 Palestinians, including 34 aid seekers, were killed and 534 injured in Israeli attacks across Gaza in the past 24 hours. The Gaza Health Ministry reported 13 bodies were recovered from the rubble of earlier strikes. Since October 7, 2023, Israeli attacks have killed over 59,000 people and injured more than 143,000 in Gaza. Since May 27th, when a new aid distribution system was introduced, 1,068 seekers have died and over 7,200 have been injured. Multiple explosions were reported over Gaza this morning, with smoke rising for hours. Amid ongoing violence, more than 100 aid and human rights organizations issued a joint call demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire, along with the lifting of all restrictions on humanitarian aid. In a statement signed by 111 groups, including Mercy Corps, the Norwegian Refugee Council and the Refugee International, the organizations warned that mass starvation is spreading rapidly in Gaza. They stressed that tons of food, clean water and medical supplies remain stranded just outside the enclave, blocked from reaching those in desperate need. A former U.S. security guard for the controversial U.S.-backed GHF aid organization has accused the group of mistreating Palestinians and using excessive force against unarmed civilians. Speaking to Israel's Channel 2, he recounted incidents where a Palestinian seeking food was pepper sprayed and a stun grenade was thrown at a Palestinian woman. He described the GHF system as beyond repair and condemned the excessive use of force against unarmed civilians. The GHF denied the allegations and stated that the guard was dismissed due to misconduct. A severe shortage of food and baby formula in Gaza is leading to the deaths of children and infants amid Israel's ongoing war and blockade. Yahya, a baby under 3 months old, died of starvation with his family unable to secure milk or food. Hospitals like Arantisi are overwhelmed with malnourished children suffering from chronic diarrhea and starvation. Mothers say they cannot breastfeed due to their own hunger. Doctors and residents warn of a deepening humanitarian catastrophe, urging the international community to pressure Israel to allow more aid into the besieged territory. For more analysis, we now move to Rana Qassasi in our newsroom. To you, Rana.
Thank you so much, Monan. For more analysis, we're joined by Ashraf Al-Ashri, the Ahram newspaper managing editor from Cairo. A very good day, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us in Q News. Sir, what impact might the reported final-stage ceasefire talks have on humanitarian access and aid delivery in Gaza?
Yes, for sure. There is a critical movement during the next hours. In Italy, Rome, they will meet with Ron Dermer, the Israeli Affairs Minister, with his counterpart in Friday. That will be the last to reach the last chapter of ceasefire deal and opening a corridor for humanitarian aid access. Less than an hour now, they are meeting and having certain adjustments on releasing Palestinian hostages in the prison, Israeli prison, and humanitarian aid access through Rafah corridor crossing, and to have U.S. strict safeguards in order to prevent Israeli military operations during the 60-day truce, to have serious negotiations to tackle the the final form of ceasefire deals. Therefore, there is an expectation to have a deal, an agreement in the beginning of next week, especially that Israel Parliament will start a vacation. During the vacation, there is no right to dismantle Israeli government unless the vacation is over after 3 months from now. There is a talks between Qatar and Egypt to solve any resolving issues, and we are expected to sign the signature in the beginning, to sign the deal in the beginning of next week with U.S. pressure and its demands and with the mediation of Qatar and Egypt.
How do continued civilian casualties, including aid seekers, affect the credibility and urgency of ceasefire negotiations?
This pressure from casualties daily as a result of scarcity of humanitarian aid and the statement issued by 28 Western and European countries with the necessity of putting an end to starvation and killing is considered an exposure to Israeli practices, which is a pressure on Netanyahu in order not to expose Israel to international isolation. And there is an influence of international community statements rejecting starvation, weaponizing hunger, and to have lead to intensifying talks to humanitarian aid allowance after the intervention of UN and all humanitarian organizations to reject the practices of killing and starvation. What happens now showed to the international community what Israel is doing, which is considered a mass murder connected to killing and weaponizing hunger daily.
How is the blockade and resulting humanitarian crisis, especially the deaths of children due to starvation, shaping international perceptions of Israel's conduct in the conflict?
Sure, this crisis exposed Israel's practices. Even Israel's friends issued a statement signed by 28 countries criticizing hunger and systematic killings to murder for Palestinians. Even the foreign minister in Britain says that he is disgusting from Israel's practices towards children and Palestinians in Gaza Strip. There is a vast, wide international rejection for Israel's practices. The U.S. feels now very embarrassed that there's criticism from its friends and Israel's friends in the West, and international community in UN, including the General Secretary rejection, who issued statements and demanding punitive acts towards Israel for what Israel is practicing in Gaza. There has become an international isolation to Israel as a result of systematic murder and hunger and blocking aid and so we need to help and save children from these practices.
What role can Egypt and other regional actors play in ensuring a sustainable ceasefire and preventing further humanitarian deterioration in Gaza?
Role is very crucial in bringing points of view closer with the help of the Qatar, with the U.S. intervention to put an end to the hideous and horrific practices against starving Palestinians. Egypt's role is very important. Egypt welcomed the role in a statement of one of the statements issued by the 28 countries and demanded international community to make critical and swift the steps to stop the hunger practices. In addition to, Egypt is playing a role in Doha by presenting new ideas to recover and to rebuild Gaza. There will be a call for a big international conference in Egypt once the truce comes into effect. We will present our initiatives with cooperation with the UN international community and Egypt's friends in the world to change the situation in Gaza once the truce takes effect, and start a new plan to compensate Palestinians of what they faced during the past period, from killing, hunger, starvation, and systemic murder daily. Egypt's role is present on all levels, on the humanitarian level, on the military side. We are present strongly. We have dozens of trucks are ready to enter Gaza, full of humanitarian aid and health relief aid once the truce takes effect.
That was Ashraf Al-Ashri, Al-Ahram newspaper managing editor. Thank you very much, sir, for your informative and in-depth analysis. We really thank you. And now we go back to Mona Msalhi in our studio.
Thank you so much, Rana, for the analysis. Back to our bulletin. And the Israeli occupation military has said it accidentally struck the Holy Family Church in Gaza City, killing 3 people. Israel said an inquiry found the church was hit due to an unintentional deviation of munitions during an operation. The attack drew sharp criticism. Cardinal Baptiste Piazzavala said an Israeli tank directly hit the church, while Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni condemned ongoing Israeli attacks on civilians. A recent UN report accused Israel of crimes against humanity for targeting Palestinian civilians in religious shelters. Gaza's government media office has confirmed the deaths of 2 Palestinian journalists, Tamer al-Zanin and Wala al-Jabri, in Israeli attacks. Al-Zanin was a photojournalist, while al-Jabri worked as a newspaper editor. The deaths bring the total number of media workers killed in Gaza since October 2023 to 231. The office strongly condemned what it called the systematic targeting and killing of Palestinian journalists by Israeli forces. The WHO has condemned Israeli strikes on its staff residence and warehouse in Deir al-Balah, Gaza, calling them a major blow to aid efforts. The residence was hit 3 times, endangering staff and families. WHO said women and children were forced to flee, while male staff were detained and interrogated. 1 remains in custody. Its warehouses and evacuation zone was also damaged. Despite this, WHO pledged to stay and continue supporting displaced Palestinians. The Norwegian Refugee Council has said its aid stocks in Gaza are completely exhausted after 145 days of blocked deliveries, with some staff now starving. Secretary General Janny Lind accused Israel of paralyzing their work, while hundreds of truckloads of aid remain stuck at the border. Fuel shortages also threaten water supplies to nearly 100,000 people. England called for a ceasefire and border opening, warning staff fear for their safety amid the ongoing crisis. Desperate residents rushed through the streets of Khan Yunis carrying sacks of aid as smoke from nearby explosions rose into the sky, a stark image of Gaza's worsening humanitarian crisis. More than 100 aid and rights groups, including Mercy Corps and the Norwegian Refugee Council, issued an urgent call for a permanent ceasefire and unrestricted humanitarian access. In a joint statement, 111 organizations warned that mass starvation is spreading across the enclave, while critical aid remains stuck at the border, blocked from reaching those in need. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has said the German government is united in calling for Israel to end its bombardment of Gaza and allow humanitarian aid, rejecting internal calls for a tougher stance. Merz said during a press conference with Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala that the coalition is united in calling for an end to the massive bombardment of Gaza and the facilitation of humanitarian aid, with no differences of opinion on the matter. Despite his growing criticism of Israel, Germany did not join a recent EU Western country statement demanding an immediate end to the war.
Eine faire, zuverlässige Verständigung mit niedrigen Zollsätzen. Diese Handelspolitik zwischen den Partnern, zwischen Amerika und Europa.
Protesters in Tel Aviv marched with flour bags and images of starving children from Gaza, calling for an end to the war and growing hunger crisis. Doctors in Gaza reported 15 people died of starvation in the last 24 hours. Over 100 have died from hunger during the conflict, including 80 children, most in recent weeks. Food shortages worsened after Israel cut supplies in March, later easing restrictions in May. Israel denies responsibility, blaming the UN for failing to prevent aid theft, which Hamas deny. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has met Ukrainian counterpart Andrei Sabayeha in Kiev to discuss defense cooperation and the growing threat posed by Iran. The ministers inspected a captured Iranian-designed Shahed drone used by Russia in attacks on Ukraine. Sa'ar condemned Russia's strikes on civilians and called for a lasting peace that guarantees Ukraine's security. Both sides agreed to launch strategic dialogue focusing on Iran's role, with Sa'ar emphasizing that preventing Iran's nuclear ambitions is crucial for European and Ukrainian security.
Плануємо розглянути перспективи співпраці в оборонній промисловості та визначити перспективні спільні проекти.
U.S. envoy Thomas Barak has urged Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara to adopt a more inclusive approach following recent sectarian violence. In private talks, Barak advised Shara to reconsider the pre-war army structure, reduce Islamist influence, and seek regional security aid. He stressed the need for swift change to maintain political momentum. Barak called for faster inclusion of minorities in government, but dismissed claims that Syrian forces targeted Druze civilians, suggesting armed forces might have impersonated security forces and warning against trusting social media videos.
What happened to the people is real. So from our point of view, we're just trying to get a timeout for everybody.
Syrian Arab Red Crescent and UN vehicles were seen waiting to enter Sweida after hundreds of Bedouin civilians were evacuated from the predominantly Druze city under a US-backed truce. The truce aimed to end days of deadly violence in southern Syria's Sweida province, which has seen hundreds killed and prompted Israeli airstrikes. The ceasefire began Sunday with security forces deployed around Sweida and Interior Minister Anas Khattab said it would enable the release of detainees held by both sides. Russian and Ukrainian negotiators have resumed direct peace talks in Istanbul, marking the first such meeting in over 7 weeks. The Kremlin confirmed its delegation has arrived in Istanbul for renewed talks, with Ukrainian spokesman Dmitry Peskov saying discussions will revisit earlier draft memoranda and focus on prisoner and body exchanges. Ukrainian President Zelensky is seeking to prepare for a potential summit with President Putin, though Moscow warned against expecting quick breakthroughs. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has said his country's top priorities ahead of this week's peace talks with Russia are securing a ceasefire and the release of prisoners. Zelensky confirmed that Ukraine's negotiating team, led by Rostam Umerov, has agreed on a meeting agenda focused on freeing captives, including civilians and children. A new prisoner exchange is expected imminently. He also highlighted ongoing anti-corruption reforms and the need to cleanse Ukraine's institutions of Russian influence to ensure justice and accountability. Ukraine and Russia have held 2 rounds of talks in Istanbul over the past 5 months, with hopes pinned on a possible leaders' summit to bring the warring sides closer to peace. The U.S. has announced it will withdraw from the UNESCO, citing its promotion of globalist ideological agenda and opposition to U.S. interests. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said continued participation is not in the national interest, criticizing UNESCO's focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals and its 2011 decision to admit Palestine as a member, which she called a highly problematic and a source of anti-Israel rhetoric. The withdrawal aligns with President Trump's America First policy and follows a review of U.S. participation in international organizations.
Outreach and create a global citizenship for our global commons and for the oceans.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has stated he deeply regrets the United States' decision to withdraw from UNESCO, the UN's Culture and Education Agency. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric stressed that UNESCO has been active in combating anti-Semitism and defended the agency from accusations of bias, noting that member states often have differing views but should engage constructively to influence change. Despite potential funding impacts from the U.S. exit, Dujarric expressed confidence UNESCO will continue its work, underscoring its commitment to peace and cultural cooperation.
The United States announced that it would withdraw from UNESCO earlier today.
China has slammed the United States' decision to withdraw from UNESCO for the 3rd time, calling it unbefitting of a responsible major country. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhou Zhekan said the U.S. has repeatedly failed to meet its financial obligations to the UN cultural body and urged nations to support multilateral institutions. Zhou reaffirmed China's strong backing for UNESCO and called on countries to uphold the UN Charter and international law. The U.S. is set to leave the agency by the end of next month. Well, that brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we've been covering. President Sisi marks July 23rd revolution anniversary with praise for resilience and progress. Israeli sources say Gaza ceasefire talks into final stage amid hopes of imminent deal. And Russia and Ukraine resumed direct peace talks in Istanbul after 7 weeks pause. Well, this concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. Many thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.